What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. So in the last two videos of our SSL series, we set up an internal CA, we walked through how PKI works, and even generated and pushed certs to some of the services in our internal network. That was phase one. That phase is more so designed for people who want more control over their certificate process in their internal network. Now we're moving on to phase two. Now, this is by far the quickest and easiest way to secure your internal services using a public CA like Let's Encrypt. So here's the game plan for this video, which again is phase two. So first, we'll grab a domain name, and then next, we'll point that domain to Cloudflare. And then after that, we'll set up an internal DNS zone that mirrors our external domain, or we can just use the same exact domain name internally. And don't worry too much about that. We'll talk about that in detail once we get to that part. After that, we'll install a reverse proxy and use a plugin called Certbot with the Cloudflare DNS plugin to automatically generate a Let's Encrypt wildcard certificate. The proxy will handle SSL termination, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute. And all our services behind the proxy will be secure and covered by our wildcard certificate. It might sound like a lot, but don't worry, we're going to go through it step by step. So here's what you need before we get started. Number one, you're going to need a domain name. That usually costs around $12 a year. Now, I don't want to say it's cheap because all of us are from different walks of life, but it's a good investment because you're going to need it both internally, like we're setting things up today, we definitely need it. And then you're going to need it once you start making your application public facing, meaning that you want to access your applications from outside of your internal environment. So it's definitely a good investment, but again, I don't want to say it's cheap, but that's something to consider. It's only $12 a year, right? And then number two, you're going to need a working DNS server. If you don't already have one, I've got a video on how to set that up. I'll include a link to it in the description box below. So make sure you check that out before you move forward. And then number three, you're going to need a free Cloudflare account. If you don't already have one, take the time to go set that up. It's relatively quick. They have a free tier and they have different tier, but for this setup, all you need is the free tier. So those are the three things that you're going to need before you can move on with this video. As always, chapters are listed below, so you can jump to whatever interests you the most. With that being said, let's go ahead, let's get started. Real quick, before we get started, no worries, we're gonna get to the video in a minute. If you're enjoying the content, please take a moment to like the video, drop a hey in the comments. Don't worry, I promise I don't bite. Don't forget to subscribe, definitely hit the subscribe button below. Doing this small things really let me know that you guys are enjoying this kind of content. It motivates me to keep creating high quality content that helps us all grow and learn together. I really enjoy learning about tech. I really enjoy building tech related stuff and things like that. And I really enjoy creating content for those kind of things, like detailed, in-depth content. So you guys doing these little things will help me out a lot and help the channel grow. These videos take a lot of time and efforts to create, so any support goes a long way in helping the channel grow. I'm working on some merch and I'm working on some other ways to help support the channel, help the channel grow. So be sure to take the time to check the description to see how you can help. Thank you guys so much for being here. With that being said, I'm gonna get out of the way now so we can get to the video part. Let's go. Before we get started, let's quickly talk about why we're using a public CA instead of just sticking with the internal CA we set up in the last few videos. A public CA works a lot like the internal CA we built in the last few videos. The difference is that it's globally trusted. As long as you can prove you own your domain, you can request a certificate for it from a public CA. Now here's the beauty of it. You don't have to push certificate out to your client. If you remember with our internal CA that we set up in our past few videos, we not only had to create the certificate, but we also had to push our root certificate to every client and server so they will recognize that certificate. With a public CA like Let's Encrypt, that problem just completely goes away. Their certificate chain back to a root CA that's already built into the trust store for pretty much every operating system, browser, and apps out there. That means that when your server presents a certificate signed by Let's Encrypt, the client automatically trusts it right out of the box. That's a huge time saver. What that means is that you don't need to manage your own CA or worry about distributing your cert across your environment. You just focus on the server side of things. Normally, you will use a public CA for front-facing services, so traffic from the outside world is encrypted and trusted. In our case, we pull in certs from Let's Encrypt, but we're keeping everything internal for now, so nothing public-facing yet. We're just making sure that our internal services are secure without the manual headache of having to push our certs to every single client that wants to communicate with our server. And the best part is we're using Let's Encrypt. So unlike other public CAs that you have to pay for, Let's Encrypt is pretty much free and it's automated. And honestly, for Homelab, there's no reason to pay for another public CA or try to get a certificate from a public CA. Let's Encrypt work just fine. Okay, so in order for us to be able to get a certificate from a public CA, we'll need a domain and be able to prove that that domain belongs to us. So the first step in this whole thing is that we need to buy a domain. We're also going to connect our domain to Cloudflare and get an API token so that the tool we use is able to communicate with Cloudflare and then request our certificate from Let's Encrypt. So let's go ahead and kick things off with those two things. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to buy the domain that we're going to be requesting the certificate for, because remember, in order for us to request a certificate from a public CA, we need to be able to prove that we own the domain. And the only way you can prove that you own the domain is by actually owning the domain. And I'm going to be using Namecheap. You can use any domain name registrar that you want. I'm using Namecheap because I do like Namecheap. So you can use GoDaddy, you can use whatever you want. It doesn't matter as long as you own the domain and you're able to prove that you own the domain. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. That's pretty much all you need. So here in Namecheap, we're going to search for the domain that we want to use. In my case, I'm going to do Quiet Engineer, ATENGINEER log. So I'm going to do Quiet Engineer log because I am going to change my series to that. Yeah, because I am a quiet engineer. And you guys are watching my log of progress. So I'm looking for quiet engineer log to see if the .com domain is available. I'm going to click search. And you can see that it has quiet engineer .engineer. That's a little bit too long for me. Well, we can also see that quietengineerlog.com is also available. And as you can see here is $11.28 a year for the first year. And then I think it goes up a little bit the next year, but it's relatively cheap, about $12 a year for the next year or something around that price. Again, me saying relative can be very subjective because everybody is in different part in their life. But I think getting a domain name, it's a good thing for learning purposes, for building, for a lot of things. And we're going to touch on a lot of those things as we build out things in this series and learn a lot of stuff, right? So it's $12 a year. So it's not that bad, to be honest. So pretty much we can see that it's available. Want the .com. You can get any one that you want, but I normally prefer the .com. And then all you need to do is just click add to cart. And that's pretty much it. We don't need any of those things right now. And we're going to go ahead and say next. Checkout. And in checkout, you can see that the domain expires in 1 year. Auto renewal is turned on. It's always ideal to turn this on or kind of select 5 years or whatever year you think you can afford. Right. The reason being that if you own this domain and you start working with this domain, you have certs for this domain, all this other things, and the domain expired, that's going to be a problem because you don't own if you don't own the domain anymore, then you can't prove that you own it. You know where that goes. So that might lead into some problems there. So make sure you set up auto renewal or you have some sort of payment in Namecheap to be able to renew things or whatever domain registry you're using. Privacy is just basically saying that it's going to hide your information from people that would normally search like your domain to try to see who owns the domain. So it's going to point them to Namecheap instead of your personal information. It's free, so auto renewal. It doesn't really matter. It says free forever, so just leave it on. We don't have DNS. We don't need DNS. We don't need anything else. That's pretty much it. And as you can see again, it's $11.48 for the whole year. And you just pretty much click confirm. Once you click confirm, it's going to take you to the next page, ask you for some of your personal information, your credit card, and all this other good stuff. The rest of the stuff is pretty straightforward. So I'm going to skip to the part where I've already paid for the domain, and we're going to look at the next step that we need to do. All right. So as you can see now, we own this domain, which is pretty much just quietengineerlog.com. To manage this domain, we just need to go here. I don't need to verify right now. I'm going to click on manage. And it's going to show us all of the information that we need for this domain. So you can see all of the information here. You have the auto renewal, you have the domain privacy, all of that is turned on, and you see the DNS. We don't have the DNS on in Namecheap. However, we're going to need to point this domain now to Cloudflare, and Cloudflare is going to act as our DNS server. And the reason for that is because Let's Encrypt will ask us to prove we own the domain before we can get a certificate for that domain, like I said earlier. And instead of us having to manually log in and add the TXT record every time we need to renew the certificates, the tool that we're going to use can call Cloudflare's API to do it automatically. So basically, when we manage our DNS through Cloudflare, we gain the ability to automate DNS change through their API, right? So basically, the next step that we're going to do is we're going to need to go to Cloudflare, and then we're going to need to create an account, and then we're going to need to get our name server, Cloudflare name server, and then point this domain to that name server so we can start managing things over um, from Cloudflare instead of Namecheap. So I'm now at the Cloudflare website. You should be able to get to this website by just typing cloudflare.com. Pretty straightforward. Cloudflare is basically a service that sits between your domain and the internet. It provides things like DNS hosting, security, performance feature like DDoS protection, CDN caching, and SSL management. It does a lot, but of course, you have to pay for those features if you want extra features. But for what we need today, we just need the free account. So you can scroll through and scroll through or scroll all the way down and read some of the things that they are capable of. We're going to touch into Cloudflare a little bit more as we kind of build more and more stuff in the lab environment. But for now, the free accounts work just fine. So just gonna go ahead and click on Start for free. And it's going to take you to this page right here. Just go ahead and fill in your information and import all of the things that you need to import, and then click on sign up. It's pretty straightforward. Email, password that you want to create, and just click sign up. Once you sign up, it's going to take you to this page, and it's going to ask you to enter your domain or register a new domain. And also you can register a new domain from Cloudflare if you want as well. So if you do want to get your domain name from Cloudflare to make things easier so everything is in one place, yeah, you can do that as well and just go through here. But I'm going to enter the domain here. This is our domain, quietengineerlog.com. And it's going to ask you a couple of questions here. Block all pages, so prevent AI from crawling your page, which you can do if you don't want the AI bots to be looking at what you're doing. But again, there's not going to be anything on this website for me. This is just being used right now, at least for the wildcard certificate. So yeah, that's fine. Why not? And then we're going to click continue because we don't need any of these other things down here. Going to click continue here. On the next page here is asking you like, hey, do you want Cloudflare to pull in some of your DNS record that you have on your domain? So if you are kind of migrating, if you already have a domain name that have DNS record, have different type of record in there, like A record, CNAME, MX record, and all this other stuff, Cloudflare is basically just going to pull it over for you. So the migration is a lot more easier. In our case, it is a brand new domain, so we don't really have much. So we're just going to say quick scan is perfectly fine. I guess if you have, if you migrate in your domain over or you add in your domain to Cloudflare, you can do quick scan so it can pull things over for you. But in our case, it's a new one. We're going to click continue anyways. And of course, it's going to tell you the price. Do you want to pay the big bucks or do you want to do the free plan? For now, again, we just need the free plan. We don't need anything fancy. The free plan is going to work perfectly fine for what we are going to do. Now, if you're rich, you can get the $2,000 a year plan. Just joking. We're going to select the free plan for now. And again, it's going to show you all of the record that it pulled over from your domain registry. It's telling us that, hey, we might have missed some common records, yada, yada, yada. Again, this is a brand new domain. We don't necessarily need this. So we're going to scroll all the way down here and we're going to click on continue to activation. Because again, we don't worry so much about that because, again, brand new domain. For the next step is telling us that we need to update our name server. Basically, it wants us to point our domain to Cloudflare so we can delegate our DNS services to Cloudflare instead of Namecheap. So we can go back here to our domain. So as you can see right now, it's pointing to the namecheck basic DNS. We don't want that. So if we scroll all the way down, Cloudflare kind of gives you this instruction: log into your DNS provider. It kind of go through that, and it say make sure DNSSEC is turned off. If it's on, it's not. So you should be good to go on that end. And down here, it tells you to replace your name server. So if we go back here, we're going to copy the first one. There's two of them here. We're going to copy the first one. We're going to go back to Namecheap, and then we're going to change this over from Namecheap Basic to Custom DNS. And it's going to ask us to enter our name server. So the first one, we're going to just paste it in, and then we're going to go back to Cloudflare. We're going to copy the second one here, and we're just going to go ahead and paste that in as well. And then we're going to click on this little check sign right here. Just click on that. And now if we just wait for it to finish, now if we look at that, we can see that our domain is now pointing to Cloudflare, and that our DNS responsibility has now been delegated over to Cloudflare. So if we go scroll down, we're just going to go ahead and click continue. So if you see this sign right here that says invalid name server, just give it a couple of minutes, just sit for a while, come back the next day and check on it, and that should go away, and this step should go away. Propagation is done. We should now be able to see that it's active here and our domain name here, and we should also now be able to see great news, Cloudflare is now protecting your site. So the DNS responsibility has been delegated over to Cloudflare. So now we should be able to generate an API key that we're going to use with our plugin to request our certificate from Let's Encrypt automatically without us having to get involved whatsoever. So the next thing that we need to do now is that we need to generate an API key that our plugin, our Certbot plugin, is going to use to communicate with Cloudflare so it can automatically request a certificate for us from Let's Encrypt without us having to be involved at all outside of just the initial setup. So to do that, what we want to do is you want to go to Cloudflare, make sure you still log in, and then go to your account here, like up top. You just click on that and it's going to show you profile, billing, and of course dark mode. You're going to click on profile, and you're going to look at the left hand here. You're going to see something that says API token. You're going to go ahead and click on that. And then it's going to ask you like, hey, do you want to generate a new API token? It's going to show you some of the ones that you already have here. And then we're going to say create a token. All right. And then what we want is something that's going to be able to edit the DNS zone. And then we're just going to use the template that they already have set in place, right? So you have different token that you can create, but what we want is this guy right here. All right. So we're going to go ahead and click on use template. And it's going to say zone, DNS, and we're going to say we want it to be able to edit because that's what's going to happen. It's going to make changes to our DNS for it to be able to verify things and then request certificate from Let's Encrypt. And then what we want is we want a specific zone, right? A specific zone means that a specific zone for a particular domain, right? So in that case, we only have one, which is Quiet Engineer Log. We're going to click on that. So the only thing that the Certbot is going to be able to edit if you have multiple domain in your Cloudflare account is this guy right here when you make it specific. If we scroll down, it's going to say like, hey, do you want to kind of filter this to a specific IP address? So if you want only your public IP to be able to kind of access this API key, you can do that. For now, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave that as blank. And of course, you can set the duration. So you can say, hey, I only want this to be active from this time to this time. And then after that, it will become deactivated. Once you do all of that, we're going to go ahead and click on create, continue to summary. And then it's going to give us a summary like, hey, this is your account. It's doing pretty much for this guy, Quiet Engineer, and it's going to be able to edit your DNS. Are you perfectly fine with that? You're going to say yes, create token. And then what it's going to do is it's going to create the token, and it's going to give you a token right here. One of the things to keep in mind is that you do not want to share your token with anyone. Your API key and your token, these are things, your API token, these are things that you do not want to share with people. It's very important that you keep this secret. It's very important that you don't go just, giving this to everyone. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Even for myself, this is a dev environment for me, but I'm still kind of covering things up. You never, ever want to share your API token. Just wanted to make that clear. So make sure you copy this token, and save it somewhere. We're definitely going to need it for the next step on the setup process when we're setting up our Certbot. So this is basically what we need for our plugin, our Certbot plugin, to be able to communicate with Cloudflare, for Cloudflare to be able to automatically generate the needed certificates so we can use it in our internal environment. And one of the things to keep in mind is that it's very important that you copy your token, because if you do not copy, you're not going to be able to view it again. You can edit it, you can make changes to it, you can delete it and stuff like that. But in terms of being able to view the token, you're not going to be able to view it again. It's kind of like a create it, see it, copy it, save it kind of thing. If you don't have it, you're going to have to create a new token because you cannot view it once you create it. So that's something to keep in mind. The next thing that we need to do is that we need to set up our proxy server. And then we need to install and configure a plugin called Certbot. Certbot is a plugin that will reach out to Let's Encrypt, validate ownership of our domain through Cloudflare, and then generate a public wildcard certificate for us to use. It will also pull in the cert into our proxy server, and it will automatically renew it when it's needed, so we don't have to worry about it expiring in the future. Before we jump into the setup, let's get a quick understanding of what a proxy server is. Now, keep in mind that I will keep the info on proxy servers a little bit brief on this video. That's because I will have a dedicated video later on in this series where I dive deeper into proxy servers. But just keep in mind that there are different types of proxy servers that you can use for this stage. But for now, we're going to use NGINX, and we'll touch on other proxy servers later on in the series. A proxy server is a middleman between a client and a backend server. It forwards requests and response, and also add features like caching or filtering and much more. Like a simple DNS record, which just map a name to an IP address, a proxy server can handle ports, do SSL and TLS termination. It can simplify access, so you don't need to type in ports in the URL, and it also adds a bit of security as well. SSL termination means the proxy or the load balancer is the endpoint for the encrypted SSL or TLS connection. It decrypts the traffic there, then forward it either as a plain traffic or re-encrypt it and then forward it to the backend server. For this setup, like I said earlier, we're going to be using NGINX, and there are two main ways that we can install NGINX. First, you have the NGINX Proxy Manager. This runs on top of Docker, and it gives you a really nice GUI for managing proxy hosts, SSL certs, and domain. And then there's the second option. This is where you will install NGINX directly on your host or in something like, let's say, an LXC container, and then you will configure everything manually. Since I'm still deep diving into Docker and don't want to jump the gun on things yet, I'll be skipping the GUI route for now and going with the direct install on an LXC container. And like I mentioned earlier, I'll cover proxy managers later in this series. There are plenty of good ones out there, and we will get to them soon enough. All right, let's go ahead and let's configure that. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to install NGINX on LXC container. And to do that, we just need to go over here and then click on Create CT. And by the way, I'm going to speed run through the LXC container creation because I've done it several times before. If you do want to see like kind of a video or detailed video about what an LXC container is, how to create, how to add an image and all that stuff, go to the channel. There are a couple of videos there that kind of go through the whole LXC container setup. For now, I'm going to speed run through the LXC container for the proxy server. So we're going to call this NGINX, and we're going to enter the password here. I'm going to enter that one more time. And then here, if you do have, let's change the resource first. Resource is test lab. And then here, if you do have an SSH key, you're just going to enter it here, your public key. Then you'll be able to SSH into the container once it's up and running. All right, so enter that here. I'm going to skip that for now. I'm going to click next. And then for template, I'm going to go to sandbox here, and I'm going to choose my Ubuntu template. For disk, you don't really need that much disk for proxy server. So I'm going to do 20. That's even more than enough. Actually, I'm just going to do 10. That's perfect. And then I'm going to do disk tab right here, my sandbox, and I'm going to go to CPU. Again, you don't need that much space, but if you feel like you do it, you can always add more, but 10 is more than enough for a proxy server. CPU, again, not that much. I'm going to just make it 2, but you don't need that much unless you're going to be hitting the proxy server a lot, but that should be more than enough. For memory, 500 MB is perfect, so I'm going to leave that for now. If anything happens in the future, you can always increase it, but for now that's more than enough because again, this is not a big environment, right? So network, I'm going to choose my VLAN here. So I'm going to do VLAN 100. That's perfect. And then for IP, I'm going to do 10.10.100.21/24. And then for gateway, 10.10.100.1. All right, that is perfect. And I'm going to click. If you're not sure what I'm doing here in terms of like bridge, in terms of IP and all that stuff, again, check out the channel. A couple of videos about networking, Proxmox networking, and all that stuff there as well. So next, DNS, we're going to do ktechlab.com. And then IP for the DNS server here is 10.10.100.3. Now, it's very important that your servers point to the correct DNS, because a lot of DNS changes that we're going to make to kind of reflect the setup that we're doing here is going to be on this DNS server, and your servers need to be able to see the DNS server to be able to hit the FQDN for your services and do the things that we need to do here. So make sure your servers are always pointing to the correct DNS. That's very important, right? DNS is very important, because if it's not pointing to the correct DNS, then it's not going to be able to see what it needs to see in regards to the FQDN for your services in your server. So very important. In my case, this right here, that's the IP for this guy right here. And if you're not sure about DNS, check out the channel. There's a video about me creating this DNS server here. Next, I'm going to go ahead and confirm. That's perfectly fine. Finish. It's going to run through. And then once it's done, it's going to say task OK. And that's pretty much all we need in terms of creation of the container. All right, it's taking a few minutes. Okay, that's perfect. So we're going to go ahead and click X. We're going to go to the container. We're going to start it up. Click Start here. And then we're going to go to console. And then we're going to let it boot up, and we're going to run some update on it. So I'm going to click Enter. Okay, and then root. Enter the password. All right, perfect. I'm just going to try to ping Google quick, just to make sure internet is working. All right, perfect. Internet is working. So I get a reply back. So sorry, that was fast. So I'm just pinging Google just to make sure that I'm getting a reply back and to make sure that I can get out on the web, because I'm going to need that to be able to run an update on the server, right? So on the container. So apt update. And we're going to do an apt upgrade -y. So I'm running an update here, and then I'm running the upgrade, and I'm doing -y for any prompt that requires me to say yes. So it's going to pull down all of the things that it needs to pull down and update the server. While it's doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my DNS server so I can create an entry for this new server that we just created. So remember, if we go back to networking here, I'm going to let that do that. If we go back to networking here, we know that the IP address is 10.10.100.21. However, if I go to any of the servers in this environment and try to ping something like ping NGINX, it's not going to work because there's no DNS entry for it, right? So what we want to do is we want to go to our DNS server here, go to console, and I'm already in the bind folder. Again, if you're not sure what I'm doing here, you check out the video, check out the channel. There's a video about the whole DNS setup and things like that. So I'm going to do nano db.k. And I'm going to create an A record for this guy, NGINX, and space, capital IN, capital A, right there. And I'm going to do 10.10.100.21. And that's the IP address for the NGINX server. So we're going to do Control X, Y, enter. All right. So Control X for to give you the action to get out of the server, Y for yes, and then enter. Right. So I'm going to go back in there. Right. All right, there you go. So this guy is right here, and I need to make another change here. I need to go to the serial since I'm doing this manually, just normally updating the serial just to keep track. And also, if you have a secondary DNS, they will know that, hey, this is the latest file, because the secondary DNS is aware of the update to this file by looking at the serial number. So I'm just going to do 4 just to say this is the latest one. So X again. Y for yes, enter, and that's it. And then another thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to enter it into the reverse zone. So I'm going to do nano, and then it's db.10. enter, and I'm going to reverse look up here, and this is 21. Again, if you're not sure what I'm doing here, please take the time to check out the video on the channel, right, about the DNS server setup. IN, and then PTR, PTR, and then it is going to be engine, this caps is on, NGINX dot keytechlab.com. Okay, and I need to put a period actually after all of this one. So let me go back here, space, period. If I can type today. So period after that. So that's good to go. So make sure your period is at the end of this, guys. And we're going to go ahead and change the serial number for this guy as well. We're going to do that 4 because this is the 4th variation of this file. And I'm going to do Control X, Y, enter. And then now we're going to do system CTL. System CTL restart bind 9. STM CTL restart BIND. I forgot the D. 9. There you go. Okay. And then now if we're to do ping NGINX, there you go. So you should be able to ping it, and it's able to say the server is 21, right? The reason for this is that we're going to need to add this to our proxy setup, and it will make sense in a minute. But ideally, every time, if you're doing this manually, right? Because one of the things that we talked about is that when we set up our DNS server, let me just control. When we set up a DNS server, we said that we want to do things manually because it allows us to be able to understand how DNS work, kind of get a feel for DNS a little bit before we start setting things to work automatically. So since you're doing things manually, and I think this is a great way, right? Because it teaches you a lot. You always have to update these things when you add a new server. So now if we go back to our NGINX server and update is done. Now what we want to do now is we want to install NGINX. And to install our NGINX server, we just want to do apt install engine x -y. So we'll do apt install nginx-y, click enter, and that's pretty much going to pull down the nginx server for us and then install it on our container. All right, so that's good to go. Now, if I do this, let's see if it's already enabled or we need to enable it. So system, that's why STEM CTL, STATUS, NGINX, X. All right, so NGINX is already up and running. You don't have to necessarily enable it, but if it wasn't enabled and you do system CTL status NGINX and didn't give you anything, you will probably first need to enable it, and you can do that by doing SYSTEMCTL ENABLE NGINX, and it will enable it, and then you can do system CTL start NGINX, but it's already running. So if we do go here and do status STATUS, we can see that NGINX is up and running. So NGINX is up and running. To be able to find the config files that we are going to be looking at for the setup, we can go into cd etc and then NGINX. If we do ls, we can see that we have these files right here. This is kind of like the config file for the NGINX server. But the ones that we're going to be paying attention to most is one, you have the site enable, site available, and then site enable. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to install a tool called Certbot, and then we need to install a plugin called Certbot DNS for Cloudflare. So the Certbot tool is basically a free open source tool that help us automatically obtain and renew SSL and TLS certificates from Let's Encrypt. And then the Certbot DNS Cloudflare plugin is kind of like a plugin, an add-on to Certbots that let us use Cloudflare DNS servers to kind of automatically prove that we own the domain, so we're able to renew and get our certificates, right? So to install that, we need to run this command right here, which is basically apt install -y. We're installing Certbot, and then we're installing the Certbot plugin for Cloudflare to be able to do the things that I just talked about. So I'm going to go ahead and click enter, and it's going to pull those two things down. And we're going to give it a few and let it do that. And then after that, we're going to create a folder in our etc path to store the API key that we created initially during the first step for Certbot to be able to use and communicate with Cloudflare and pull down our certs from Let's Encrypt. So let's just give it a couple of few. Okay, that's pretty much done. All right, so once that's done, I'm going to click Control C. So now we have Certbot, and then we have the plugin that's needed to communicate with Cloudflare. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a folder where we're going to store our API key from Cloudflare. So we're going to do mkdir, and we're going to say /p. All right, and then we're going to create this in etc, and we're going to call it LATS ENCRYPT. So we're going to call it Let's Encrypt, and then we're going to create it in etc. And the -p just means that if any of this is not created along the way, make sure you create it. So I'm going to click enter. And now we can CD into that, right? And once we CD into it, we can create a file that we're going to use to be able to store API key, and we can do that by doing nano. We're going to call it loudflare.ini, and we're going to click enter. And then here, we're going to paste. I'm going to paste this guy here. So basically what we're going to do here, I'm going to get rid of this. What we're going to do is we're going to enter our token, our Cloudflare token here. So you're basically just going to paste the token right here. And that's why I said make sure you save that token so you don't have to kind of try to regenerate a new one. But if you do have it, you're just going to right click or Control V and then paste it. And then once you paste your token, you're going to do Control X and then Y and then enter. And then if you do ls, you can see that now we have the Cloudflare in it here, and your token is right there. And this is the token that the Certbot is going to use to be able to pull down the things that it needs to pull down in terms of your wildcard certificate for your domain. Now, one of the things that we want to do is that ideally the best way to set it up, the most secure way to set this up is to be able to have something like Vault, HashiCorp Vault, to where you save all of your credential, your API keys and things like that, and then have your servers automatically pull it down and then delete the file once it's no longer needed. But again, this is an environment that we're building step by step, and I haven't set up Vault yet. That I am going to set that up. It's a lot of things that need to be set up. I'm only one person, so and this videos take such a long time to create, man. It's when you're really trying to create a video that's pretty detailed, it always takes forever. So bear with me for now. What we're going to do, just to be a little bit secure, is that we're going to change the permission of this folder so that it's owned by the root user and nobody else can access it, or the user that's logged in and things like that, which in our case is the root user. So nobody else can access it. And to do that, I'm going to do ls one more time. So we're going to do chmod, right? And then we're going to do 600. And then we're going to do cloud and then enter. So basically just change the permission so that it can only be read by the root user and nobody else. It's a little bit extra layer of security until we have something like Vault set up, and then we can put this API key up to Vault and not having to save things like this manually on our server, because that's not secure. Just wanted to kind of clarify that. All right, so once we're done with that, we'll pretty much have all of the components that we need. We have our plugin, we have chatbots, and we have all of the other components that we need to be able to request our certificate from Cloudflare. The only thing left for us to do now is to tell Certbot to request our certificate through Cloudflare from Let's Encrypt. And to do that, we're going to run this command right here. I am going to have this command on the website, and I'm going to make sure the command align with the video and the command on the blog. On the last blog, I did update the command, but this time around, I'm going to make sure the command that's here is the command that's on the blog. And if it changed, some of those things change, some of those things don't work. So if it change, I'll try my very best to update it. But this command is going to be on the blog, right? So, okay, so this is the command that we're running to basically just request certificate from Let's Encrypt through Cloudflare. So I'm just going to jump all the way up here. We don't need sudo because it's running as root user. And then basically we're just telling it like, hey, run the command, use Certbot to get the certificate, but don't do anything besides getting the certificate, just only get the certificate. And then we're telling it to use the Cloudflare DNS plugin to be able to go through our domain validation. And then you have the DNS Cloudflare credential. This is basically just pointing to the file that we set up with the API key. So this guy is able to communicate with Cloudflare and be able to log in with no issue. And then we'll tell it to wait for about 60 seconds after the plugin has updated our DNS and do the TXT record and all that stuff. We say wait 60 seconds before we move on to the next part, which is basically just grabbing the stuff from Let's Encrypt. So here we're saying like, hey, grab the certificate for our top level domain, so our main domain, so quietEngineerLog.com, and then grab a wildcard certificate for all the subdomains in our domain. All right, because this is a wildcard. And then we're saying non-interactive, meaning that we don't want to interact with it. Just do what you have to do and then agree to anything that you have to agree to. And then for email, we have like the email address here. You don't necessarily need to put this, but for anything that happens, this is where they will send you an email. So you want to make sure this is a working email. Not necessarily needed, but hey, if you need it, you can enter it there. So once I click enter, I should be able to go up to Cloudflare and then you should be able to talk to Cloudflare, update the record, prove that we own the domain, right? Because we need to do that. And then grab the certificate that's needed to pull it down and then save it on our server. So once I click enter, it's doing its thing. It's saying that it's not able to request. If it does this, sometimes it does this, just try to run it again. So let's go back one more time. I'm going to paste that command in one more time. Just rerun it. I've found that it does that sometime the first time you run it, saying that it's not able to communicate or request certificate from this guy or network issue. That's perfectly fine. So just run it again. And it normally works when you run it again. So as you can see, it's doing its thing. It's giving you information here about your Python package. Not really that important. And it's going to wait for 60 seconds to retry requesting the certificate from Let's Encrypt. So let's just give it a couple of seconds here. Again, all of this command is going to be on the blog. You're just going to need to change. You're going to need to change this guy, right? So you're going to need to change this guy right here to your domain. You're going to need to change this guy right here to your domain as well. So just keep that in mind. And then, of course, you're going to need to change the email address here to your domain as well. So this normally take a few. As you see, it's waiting for 60 seconds. While we wait, maybe we can talk about a couple of things that I have coming. I have a lot of videos that I'm working on. Videos are a lot of work to create, especially videos that are pretty lengthy. Try to be as detailed as possible. It can take a little bit longer to create this video. So you guys need to bear with me if the videos take a little bit longer than usual, because it's just a lot of work to create these videos, man. Okay, so it says that we have successfully received your certificate. So it has created the wildcard certificate for us. That's exactly what we need. And then here you can see that the certificate is located at this location right here. So if we were to grab this guy right here and just cd, make sure you make note of these two guys right here. You're going to need it. So copy these two guys. We're going to need it in the proxy configuration. So make sure you're aware of where these things are located, especially these two guys. It's very important that you're aware of this two right here, because we're going to need it. So if you were to grab one of them, for example, grab this guy real quick and then just cd into it. So cd, let's just try to get into that guy and then just click enter. If we do ls, now you can see that we have our certificate chain and then we have our private key right here. And that's pretty much what we need. So now we have our certificate for our domain. We're able to prove that we own the domain. We're able to ask Cloudflare to ask Let's Encrypt to give us a wildcard certificate for our domain. And we're able to pull that domain down to our server so that our proxy server can use it when it's when it's doing SSL termination. Now, one of the things that we don't want to do over and over again is that we don't want to keep running this command every time the certificate expire. This is a certificate right here. When the certificate expire, we don't want to be running this over and over again every time manually for it to be renewed. So what we need to do is that we need to run a command that will enable and immediately start the Certbot system timer. So it will automatically run certificate renewal starting from the moment we run it, even if the computer reboots. So that way, when the certificate expires, it will grab a new one and it will just automatically put it in this location, which is this guy right here. Pretty much just replace this guy and add the new one, the updated one, so you don't have to worry about that for a while. The only time you might have to worry about that is that if your API key change or something happened, then of course, Certbot cannot reach Cloudflare to be able to do what it needs to do. But that command, the command that we need to run is this guy right here. We're going to do system CTL enable dash now, we'll say now, and then a certbot timer to kind of start that countdown so it automatically comes in check and then renew the certificate when it needs to be renewed. And then to be able to see that, we're just going to do grep here. And then we're going to check and see when the certificate is going to, or when this stuff is going to run again to be able to check. And as you can see, it's going to be run on the 27th. Today is the 26th. It's going to be run the 27th on this time, which is on Wednesday, to check again to try to see if the certificate has expired. And if it has, it will grab the correct certificate and just put it here, which allows us to be a little bit hands off, meaning that, hey, we're not coming back here to be able to check and see what is going on with the certificate, is the certificate expiring and all that stuff. We don't have to worry about that. So now we're at the point where we have our Certbot set up, we have our Cloudflare stuff set up, we have the tool that's able to automatically check for the certificate, and if it expires, it's going to replace it with the updated one. We're good to go. So now what we need to do is we need to make sure our DNS configuration is up and running the way it needs to run, because it is very important. DNS plays a key role in this whole setup. In general, DNS play a key role in your whole environment, right? But in this setup, it's very important that DNS is set up correctly. It is very important that all of the servers that you want to be able to reach your services are talking to the right DNS. So let's go ahead and let's jump into that. Next up, we need to set up our DNS server, and we can do this in a couple of ways. If you already have an internal domain and you go out and buy a different public domain, you can just create another DNS zone for the public domain internally. In that zone, you will create an A record for each of your services, but instead of pointing them directly to the server, you point them to the proxy server. That way, when the FQDN for the service is hit, it goes to the proxy server. The proxy server then handles SSL termination and then route the traffic to the correct backend server. Now, one of the main reasons we're doing this is because the certificate we got from the public CA only applies to our public domain. If the certs being presented doesn't match the domain name being used to access the service, you'll get an SSL error. So your FQDN needs to line up correctly with the domain the cert was issued for. Now, if your external domain matches what you already have set up in your internal network, so let's say, for example, you buy test.com and your internal DNS zone is also test.com, you may want to set up 2 A records for certain services and servers. So for example, proxmox.test.com points to your proxy, which points to your service, and then proxmoxserver.test.com points directly to the backend server. Now, one of the reasons why you might want to do this is because ICMP, which is ping, can pass through the proxy server. So if you only have something like proxmox.test.com, a ping will just reply with the proxy's IP. But if you have something like proxmoxserver.test.com, you can ping the server or reach the server directly without having to try to go through the proxy server. This is useful when you have to, let's say, troubleshoot something, or you just want to ping something very quick to find out what the IP is. Whatever it is that you're using ICMP for, it's useful to set things up this way, because then you're able to ping the server directly when it's needed. Keep in mind that the reason why we're doing all of this is because we want everything to be internal for now. In a scenario where you want things public facing, meaning that you want to be able to access your services outside of your internal network, you will have something like Cloudflare DNS record point at your proxy's public IP address. But in our case, well, we're not doing that yet. Instead, we're replicating our public domain internally so we can use the cert from the public CA to secure all of the services in our internal network. This gives us a centralized TLS without the hassle of creating and distributing our own CA. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so the next thing that we're going to set up is our DNS server. Your DNS server is very, very important because this is the only way the devices in your environment are able to understand what server your FQDN is pointing to. So when you type in something like proxmox, in our case, ktechlab.com, it will know what server that is and be able to direct you to the right server, right? So your DNS server is very important. If you don't know how to set up a DNS server, I do have a video on the channel kind of going through the whole setup that we have here. So this is our current DNS server. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do ls, and I'm going to look at our current zone. So I'm going to do nano. And again, if you don't know what all of this is, just go back and take a look at the DNS video and then come back and watch this guy. So our zone is located in here. So I'm going to do enter. So as you can see, our current zone is ktechlab.com. Right, so that's our DNS zone for this environment so far. And then we also have our reverse lookup set up here, zone set up here as well. And for our proxy server, we're not going to need a reverse lookup zone, but we'll talk about that in a few. This is what we have set up so far. So I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to do ls one more time, and I'm going to look at the zone file here, which is this guy. So I'm going to do nano, and I'm going to do db.k. And then this is our zone file currently. And as you can see, we have a couple of A records in here for all of our servers. So DNS, CA, Proxmox, and NGINX. NGINX is the one that we just set up. So what I was talking about earlier is that there are two ways that we can set this up, right? So let's assume that we were able to get ktechlab.com for our external domain, which I can't because it's too expensive. Let's assume that we were able to get it, right? And our external domain now match our internal domain. Now, the way we'll set this up, and let me set this up here real quick, and then we can talk about it. So I'm going to click enter here, go back here real quick, click enter, and I'm going to call this Proxmox XMOX SRV, and I'm just going to do IN just to make it real quick, A, and I'm going to do 10.10.100.50, and I'm going to come down here and I'm going to change this to 21. All right. Okay. Let me explain it real quick. Real quick. So now we have two A records for pretty much the same server, but the way this is set up, and again, this is in regards to if you have the same domain, your domain is the same internal and external, right? So the way this is set up right now is that if we want to talk to the server or want to ping the server, we'll do something like proxmox srv.ktechlab.com, and then that will go directly to the server. However, when we want to access the services, which is Proxmox, the Proxmox GUI, we'll do something like, when we want to access it through the proxy, we'll do something like proxmox .ktechlab.com, which would direct us to the proxy server. And then once we hit the proxy server will know what to do, and we'll talk about that in a few, and then redirects that traffic back to this guy. And the reason why it's doing that is because then the proxy server is going to do SSL termination before it redirects it back to this guy right here. So if your internal is the same, your internal domain name is the same as your external domain name that you just got, this is how you would most likely set it up to make it easier on yourself. And you will do something like create maybe another stuff here and then call it something else. So maybe just copy this guy, come down here, and then you would just paste that, and then maybe call this a record internal, something like that. NAL, caps is on, internal. All right, and then you would just get this guy right here, and then let me just do that so it kind of clear things up a little bit. And then we can turn on and then enter, and then you would just paste that down here. So now the way you have it, and then you can get rid of this guy. I know it's a lot. I'm doing a whole lot, but it just help make things clear for you guys. So I'm going to get rid of that real quick. All right, boom. And then we're going to say 21. Boom, and it will look something like that. So now we're seeing that every time someone hits this FQDN proxmox.ktechlab.com, is going to redirect them to the proxy server, and then the proxy server is then going to redirect that user to the server. And again, just give me a few. We're going to see how to do that to the server. which then do SSL termination, so you don't have to do the whole SSL thing manually, right? Push down the certificate, the whole thing that we did for our internal CA. So again, if you have an internal, again, I know I sound like a broken record, but if your internal and your external domain are the same, this is how you will most likely set it up. I hope that makes sense for you guys. It's just a way for separation, so it makes things a little bit easier. So when you have them separated, one is for your A record for your servers, and then the other one, and you can call this whatever you want, right? So you can call this you can name this whatever you want. So whatever is convenient for you that allows you to be able to see that separation, you can separate them that way. But we're not going to do that because our external domain is different. So I'm going to bring this back up here. I'm going to get rid of this because we don't necessarily need this. Now, the way we're going to set this up, because our internal domain is ktoechlab.com, but our external domain is quietengineerlog.com. So I'm going to get out of this, right? And I'm going to click no. Now, what we need to do on our DNS server is that we need to set up a new internal zone that kind of reflects what our external zone is. So, and for me, I like it that way too, because it just keeps things a little bit cleaner. So I have one zone file for my internal, and then I have like a zone file that I would just set up for my proxy, for things hitting my proxy and things like that. It just keeps things a little bit clean, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to first create a zone that is going to be dedicated to our new external zone, to replicate our external zone. To do that, we want to nano, and we want to do name, the local, and we want to basically just add another zone in here. So I'm going to move this down a little bit, and we're going to add our new zone in here. And I'm going to move this up a little bit, so it's a little bit organized. So perfect. So now, again, very similar to our ktoechlab zone, we have another zone here, which is called quietengineerlog.com. And we're telling it like, hey, this is where you need to look for the zone file. And we're going to create that because we haven't created that yet. So I'm going to just copy this guy. It makes it easier for me so I don't have to type the whole thing. And I'm not going to create a reverse lookup zone for my new quiet engineer zone. And the reason for that is because this is pretty much just going to point to the proxy server. So I don't need to create a reverse lookup zone to be able to see like, hey, what IP address is that and all that stuff, because it doesn't make sense. It's only one IP address, right? It's the proxy server. So I don't need a reverse lookup zone for that. So this is perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create Control X, click Y, click yes, and then do ls one more time. And I'm going to do, just go home here and let's do cat. And there you go. So we have our primary zone, right, separated from our new zone. We just keep things a little bit clean and nice for us. And now what we need to do, if I do ls here, you can see that we have our zone file for our ktoechlab zone, but we don't have our zone file for our quiet engineer zone. So I'm going to do cp. I'm going to copy this empty guy right here. So it's going to be db.empty. And then I'm going to copy it and I'm going to call it this guy. And I'm going to call it this, because in our config file here, we'll take a look at it again in a minute. We told our config that like, hey, this is where you need to look to be able to find our forward zone file, right? Our forward lookup zone file, right? So I'm going to click enter, and then I'm going to do ls one more time. And now, as you can see, our zone file has been created. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to nano into this, and I'm going to show you guys this one more time so you see what I'm talking about. So cat name local. So as you can see, we told it like, hey, this is where you need to look to be able to find the zone file for this zone. So I'm going to click X out of that, ls one more time, and I'm going to do nano to edit db q, and then enter. So this is what it looks like. We're going to get rid of this. We don't necessarily need any of this. And I'm going to paste in our new config here. And this is very similar to our other zone file, right? So if you don't know what these things are, you can go back to our DNS config video and take a look at that. It will explain what all of these are. Going down the list, that's our zone. We have serial. This is our first edit. So we're just going to leave it at 1. You got to refresh, retry, expire. Again, you go back and look at the video if you want a detailed explanation for this. I don't want to spend too much time explaining it here. And then, of course, we have our zone here. We're telling it like, hey, this is our zone. and we're basically telling it here like, hey, this is where you're going to be able to find the zone, which is just basically the IP address for the DNS server. So we're telling it like, hey, this is the name server for the zone, right? And this is the IP address for the name server of the zone, which again is our DNS server, right? We'll just have two different zones in a DNS server, but it's pretty much the same DNS server. And then in here, this is very important, right? So now we're setting an A record, but what you notice is that this is a wildcard. We're setting a wildcard A record to basically just point to our proxy server. So basically what we're telling it here is that any subdomain that's hit, so if someone comes and type in proxmox.quietengineer.com, directly send it to this guy. If someone comes in and type in volts.quietengineer.com, and I'll show you guys in a minute, pointing directly to the proxy server. That's because every traffic that come through for this domain, we want it to hit the proxy server so the proxy server can make a decision as to where that traffic needs to go. And we'll see how to kind of go about doing that in a couple of minutes, right? Because we're going to set up the proxy server to redirect traffic to the backend server, right? So now we have a wildcard. This is the best way to set it so you don't have to individually, because if you don't do this, every time you add a new server, you're gonna have to come in here and then put that server name and then say like, hey, that, and then point it to the same address, which is pretty much tedious for doing the same thing, and you don't want to do that. So we just say, hey, any subdomain of this domain, just point it to the proxy server. Clean, simple, easy. I like it this way again because it creates that separation and it just makes life a little bit easy. So we're gonna do Control X, Y, and X. Control X, head out, exit. It actually, if you want to save it, Y and then X, enter means save it, right? So if we do ls one more time, and then if we do catdb.q, right? You see that our stuff here is completely set up and running. All right, I'm going to copy this real quick because I'm being lazy and I don't want to type the whole thing. So we're going to do SYSTEM CTL, restart, STARTBIND 9. All right, we're going to restart the bind server. And now if we go back and run that command, well, initially I didn't actually put ping in front of that. It will help if I put ping in front of it. So let's go home. Let's do ping, enter. And as you can see, it's going to our proxy server, which is exactly what we want. So anything, so any subdomain whatsoever. So if I do go back here and then go back here and say Volt, for example, so let's say VAULT, boom. This is really clean. That means that all of our services, no matter what service name you, let's say you have Home Assistant, you can say homeassistant.quietengineer.com. Boom, it's going to point us to the proxy server. You can say, I don't know, whatever you setting up in your house, media.quietengineerlog.com. Again, that is just going to go back to our proxy server. Clean, easy. And then when you go to your DNS LS here, you have two different zone file, which again help just keep things pretty clean, right? And that's perfect. Now, before we go on, there's one more thing that we need to do. So to check, so go back here, right? Because we're going to be using the Proxmox server as an example, right? So go back here, go to KTech Lab here, db.k, let's see, nano db.k, and just enter. Now, we're going to need the name, right? We're going to need proxmox.ktechlab.com. Remember that, or in your case, whatever your service is. So if you have, like, let's say Volt, it'll be volt.yourdomainname.com. We're going to need that because when we set up the proxy server, right? So when one of our user or us hits our service, let's say proxmox.quietengineer.com, and it will all make sense in a minute, just bear with me. proxmox.quietengineer.com, what's going to happen is that traffic is going to hit our proxy server. And then our proxy server is going to look at its config and say like, oh yeah, I have some information for this. And it's going to look at it and say like, oh, okay, this is supposed to go to the backend server. And that backend server is proxmox.ktechlab.com. Now, there's two ways that you can set that up. You can point it directly to the IP, or you can use the FQDN. But just make sure you remember what the FQDN is, or remember what the IP is. That's the last thing that we need to check on our DNS before we switch over to our proxy server. So our DNS is pretty much up up and running. We're good to go. We've set up, we've replicated the external domain that we got. We replicate a zone for it internally. So now all of our services can be reached, right? And now we're able to use the wildcard certificate that we generate that applies to that domain, which is this guy right here, right? So keep in mind that whatever server you're using, whatever um, services you're trying to access, whatever machine you're using needs to be looking at this DNS server, because that's the only way it's going to be able to see this guy and be able to kind of redirect it to the proxy server, and the proxy server is going to redirect it to the correct place. So that's it. Our DNS is up and running. All right, so we pretty much got everything up and running. We have our DNS taken care of. We have our certificate good to go that we pulled down from Let's Encrypt through Cloudflare. So everything is good to go. The only thing that we need to configure now or finalize now is our proxy server. So if, for example, I go to the client here and I just type in, let's say, proxmox.quietenginer.com, we can see that that is hitting the proxy server just fine, because in our DNS, we have a wildcard that says any subdomain whatsoever that of the Quiet Engineer domain, just pointing directly to the proxy server. One of the things to keep in mind is that your servers need to be pointing to your DNS. I know I keep saying that, but that is very, 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 very important. The things that you're going to be using to access your services, your devices, they need to be able to see your DNS. Either you set up a DNS and then set up another DNS upstream or something like that, but they need to be able to see your DNS server where you have your zones and things like that, or else they're not going to be able to make sense as to what this is, right? But as you can see, our proxy server is serving something, but it's not serving what we want it to serve, because ideally when we hit this, it's supposed to hit this guy right here, which is the Proxmox server. And the Proxmox server is, of course, is going to take out to the GUI, and we don't even have to put any port whatsoever, because the proxy server should ideally take care of that for us. But we need to configure that, because right now it's just on the default. So if we go back to the proxy server here, we're going to go into the config file location that we looked at, we glanced at earlier. So I'm going to do cd, I'm going to do etc, and I'm going to do NGINX, and then I'm going to do ls. So there's a bunch of files in here, but there are two main files we're going to pay attention to, which is site enable and site available. Again, don't worry too much about proxy servers. Like I said earlier, there's so many things that I want to dive into. There's so many things that I want to do, create videos for. The list is long. The list is very long. So eventually we'll dive deeper into proxy servers. I want to test out different proxy servers. We'll get there. But for now, all you have to worry about is site available and site enable. Site available is kind of like the library where you make all of your edits, right? You will create and we're going to see, let me see into that for a minute. So we'll do site, site available here, and then ls. Site available is where you make all of your config, is where you have a file for each of the services that you want your proxy server to be able to present something for. So right now, as you can see, the default is here. So that's why when we go back to the client here and we hit the client, we get the default page, because that's what is being served, right? So I'm going to go back. So in here is where you have all your library. And then what will happen is that after you make a change in here, you're going to create a syslink or a system link or file link, whatever you want to call it, but it's called a syslink to, let me go back, cd dot do ls cd site enable. And then you're going to create a syslink to the file in here. So this file is technically just linking to the file inside enable. So once you create that syslink, and you only have to do it once, it's basically, this is the same exact file as in the file that's inside enable. Once you create that syslink, any changes that you make to the file that is in the site available is going to reflect the file that you have here, because again, it's just, this file is basically just linking to that file. So if you were to remove, so if I go cd do ls and then cd into site available, right? Enter. If I was to remove this, we're going to run into a problem where the file in the site enable is going to become red, where it says like, hey, I can't find the stuff that I'm looking to anymore. And that's going to be a problem, because, well, it's going to fail because you can't see anything, right? So ideally, the way you should be able to do it, or the way you should do it, is that once you set up the folder for whatever service, or the config file for whatever service that you want to set up here, you want to do a syslink once, And if you do want to remove their service, remove it in site enable, not site available. Because remember, site enable only just syslink to the files in here. So remove it from site available, and then if you want, then you can remove it here. But you don't necessarily need to, right? Because again, the proxy server only serves, and I know I'm hitting on this, but this is very important. The proxy server only serves what is in here. It doesn't serve what is in here. It only serves what is in here after you've created a syslink to that particular item to the site enable folder. So I hope that makes sense, and it will make sense in a minute. But that's one thing that I wanted to kind of clarify before we move on. So to be able to configure the stuff that we need to configure for our Proxmox server, and this is something you're going to need to do for each and every one of your services. So what we want to do is we want to cd into site available, and then we want to create a folder. So right now the only folder that's in there is site, the default site, and we're going to remove this in a minute because we don't really necessarily need it anymore. We want to create a new folder for the Proxmox server, and you will create a new file, a new config file. You create a new config file for each and every one of your services. So if you're setting up Vault, you create a new config file for Vault. If you're setting up, I don't know what, Nextcloud, you set up a new config file for Nextcloud. It just allows you to separate your config file for each and every one of your services. What we're going to do, we're going to say nano, and then we're going to say Proxmox, Prox, MOX. All right. So we're going to call this config file Proxmox, and then we're going to click enter. Right. And then I'm going to copy the config over here, and I'm going to explain it because it's long. I'm going to paste that here. So this is what the config file is going to look like for your Proxmox configuration. So let's go through it real quick. Right. So what we're basically doing here is, one, we're telling it to listen on port 443, which is a secure port. And then two, we're telling it every time someone hits this subdomain. So every time someone hits proxmox.quietengineer.com, right? This is the guy that's going to trigger this particular config file, right? And again, if you have something else where it's Nextcloud, it's going to be nextcloud.quietengineer.com, or let's say anything else that you're setting up. Let's say, I don't know, what else do you guys set up in your environment? Sonar, so sonar.quietengineer.com, or anything else that you set up in your environment is basically just going to be the first name here. Right, and don't forget your domain. And then here, we're pointing it to our certificate. This is the certificate. If you remember, when we create when we generate our wildcard certificate, that wildcard certificate was placed in here, right? So this is where our Let's Encrypt wildcard certificate was placed. As you can see, this is the full chain, and then you have the private key here. So we're basically telling the proxy server, like, hey, this is where you'll find the certificate and the private key for the certificate that I want you to use to encrypt things. So once someone hit this server right here, this is the certificate that's going to be used to do SSL termination, because the only reason why we're doing this is because we want the proxy server to do SSL termination for us. Now, the proxy servers of themselves do a lot more than SSL termination, but that's one of the things that we wanted to do for this particular video, right? Because we want to easily secure everything in our network. So this, again, this right here is the wildcard certificate, the location of the wildcard certificate that we generated earlier. This is where it goes. So you need the chain and the key. And then we're forcing it to say, like, hey, only use SSL protocol TLS 1.2 and 1.3, and we're forcing it. And we're saying that, yeah, force this and then turn it on. Here, we're telling this, now we're moving into the backend. This is all the front end. We're moving into the backend, and we're telling the proxy server, like, hey, once someone hits this, right, you're basically going to redirect them to this backend server. So remember previously I said that, hey, make note of your backend server. So our backend server name is proxmox.ktoechlab.com, which is 8006. So if I was to grab this guy, for example, right, if I was to grab it and then go to, let's see, where's my client? My client here. And log in. Let me log in here. Okay. Hey, if I remember the password. I have a problem always remembering my password. And then I hit this guy right here. Let's do, I'm being lazy here. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this guy, and I'm going to get rid of that. KTech, this here, lab.com. what is it, proxmox.ktechland.com, and I enter the port, which is 8006. Right, we can see that this is our backend server. If I scroll down here, this is the Proxmox server that we set up for testing. So I'm going to do click here, and it's going to load. It takes some time. We can see that this is our backend server. So basically, let's go back here to our thing here. What we're telling it is like, hey, when someone hits this, we want you to be able to use the certificate to be able to do SSL termination. And we want you to redirect it to the server and make sure the port is included, so we don't have to worry about the ports anymore. All we have to do is just put in this guy. That's pretty much what this is doing, right? This is where you put, again, I'm going to repeat a couple of things because just want to make it clear. But this is where you put in the backend server. It could be the IP address. It doesn't necessarily have to be the server. So it could just be the IP address for this guy. Remember, I said this could be the FQDN or the IP address. In my case, I'm doing the FQDN because the FQDN is always better than the IP address, just in case the IP address change. So you can put the IP address here. You can put the backend server. And then moving on, this guy is being served through HTTPS. Now, if you don't have SSL setup or anything like that, you can remove the HTTPS and then just do HTTP. This is basically just telling the proxy server to say like, hey, I want you to validate the certificate that's being used and make sure the correct certificate that's being used. So what that means is that when the traffic comes from your client and it hits this guy, this certificate is going to be used to do SSL termination. But on the back end, when the proxy server is communicating with your backend server, you want that communication to also be secure, right? Because that's if you don't secure that, that could be something. It depends on how secure you want your environment to be, right? Because if someone makes it into your environment, they'll be able to do packet capture, and they can be able to kind of like see that traffic that's going between your proxy server and your backend server. Maybe you don't necessarily want that. You can turn that on, and then you can tell the proxy server like, hey, turn that on. This is the server name, and this is where you'll be able to find the location for that particular certificate that I'm using for SSL for my backend server. In that case, you will need to be able to have an internal CA, which we already went over, and then you will need to generate certificate, the whole 9 that we went over. And that's what you use to encrypt your traffic on the back end. And this settings right here, for me right now, is off. But if you really do want to secure, because again, this is test, but I included this so you guys can see how you will be able to do that. You need to turn this on and tell it like, hey, just make sure that communication from the proxy to the backend is also secure. This guy, I added this guy because I kept on running into an issue. The issue was that every time I connect to the Proxmox server, connection keeps getting dropped when I was trying to like work on the console for specific VMs and things like that. So basically what this is doing is it lets the web Proxmox console WebSocket connect stay up, so I don't have to it doesn't have to disconnect all the time, and I don't have to kind of like refresh or try to like figure out why the console is not working. I run into that issue a lot, so I added this to be able to kind of like force the web socket connection to stay up, and it doesn't allow the console to give me a bunch of issues that I'm running into. This is why this is there. You don't necessarily need it, but I added it because I kept on running into that issue. And then here, this is basically just passing header information to the backend server. So the proxy is passing the header information like the host, the client IP, the forward IP chain, the forwarder IP chain, like all of this other information, header information is basically just passing it to the backend server. There are also situations where you need to pass some things to the backend server. These where you add some of those configurations to be able to pass information to the backend server. And then all the way at the bottom, right, we're basically telling it like, hey, if anybody try to access this through port 80, which is basically HTTP. So if someone was to type this guy right here, proxmox.quietengineer.com, this guy right here, proxmox.quietengineer.com, and they just type it in without typing HTTP, force it to redirect to HTTPS. So do a redirect and then force it to go to HTTPS, right? So basically that's what this guy is doing right here. So this is the config for our Proxmox server. This is the config that you need to set up for each and every service that you want to set up on your proxy server, right? And for the most part, what you would change is just this guy, and then you would change what backend server that you want it to go to. And then, of course, you would change this guy right here. And if it's not really something where you interact with the console, then you probably remove this, right? So again, it all depends on what you're setting up, and there's a whole bunch of configs that you can go around and set up. But this is what you will use normally. This will be a template for you to be able to set up all of your devices and your services and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and click Control X and then say, yes, I want to save it and enter. And now if I do ls, now you can see that Proxmox is now in here. And as I said before, we don't necessarily need the default anymore, so we can go ahead and remove that. But before I do that, I'm going to go into cd ... here. And keep in mind that I'm going to go back into site because I want to show you guys something. Site available, do ls. You can see that the Proxmox config file has been created and the default config file has been created. However, if we're going to cd, cd ... let's go one back and do ls, and then cd site, enable, right, and then ls. We can see that the only thing that's in here is the default. That's because we haven't created a system link yet to point to drop a thing in here that points directly to the file in the site enable Proxmox config. So we don't necessarily need this. We don't need the default anymore. It's always a good thing to remove like default config when you're setting up things. I'm going to do RM and I'm going to do default. We don't need that anymore. So there's nothing in here. So if I go cd ... let's go back one, do ls here, and then cd into site available, right, and do ls. We can remove the default here again. Now what we need to do is we need to create a syslink now of this file to the site enable folder. So there's a syslink from that the site enable folder to this guy right here. So you guys will see what I mean in a minute. So if we click ls, the only thing in here is Proxmox. For us to create a syslink, we're going to run this command. And if you're not already in sudo, which in my case we are, because all of the containers default to the root user. So you're going to run this command right here. This command is basically just creating a link, and it's saying that like, hey, this file right here, which is the Proxmox file. Let's see. I think I removed some things. Then we go back here. I think I just do delete. I tend to do things the hard way sometimes. But as you can see right here, it's basically just using this thing, and we can always get rid of that right here, and then just do Proxmox just to make sure we have the correct spelling and all that stuff. So we're basically just linking this guy, and we're telling it like, hey, just add it to the site enable folder right here. So if I click enter, it's going to say that's done. If you do ls, we'll see one. But now if we cd ... go back here, do ls, cd into site, site enable, and do ls. Now we can see that there's been a syslink in here created to our file on the site available. Again, if we do cat, Proxmox is going to be the same thing, but you do not make changes in here, right? Because remember, this is just linking to that. When you want to make changes, you're going to go to the site available config, make changes in here, and that change will be reflected here because again, this is just a link, right? So if I do cat Proxmox, you can see it's exactly the same thing. And if I wanted to make change, I'll go to the site enable, make change, and it will reflect in here. And if I want to remove this, I'll remove it from in here. So that's pretty much done, right? So now, ideally, when someone hits, so if I go back, when someone hits, let's do nano, Proxmox. When someone hits this guy right here, ideally, if everything is working correctly, it should redirect it to this guy. We don't need to put 8006, and it should do SSL termination for us. So we don't have to worry about any SSL in our environment. And you can see how powerful this is because then now you have something that does SSL termination. SSL termination is done at the proxy level. You don't have to worry about SSL that much anymore. You can configure as much services as you want, and they all do SSL termination. So you set something up, you set up something in the proxy for it, and then you just set up a config file, and then it redirects it to the back end when you hit that service, and then that does SSL termination. Your applications are all secure. The only thing that I would say to keep in mind is that depending on how secure, like we talked about, depending on how secure you want things to be, the communication from your client, whatever client you're using to access your the services or hit your proxy server, that communication is secure through the Let's Encrypt certificate. However, the communication from the proxy server to the backend is not secure if you don't secure it. So, and then that's where something like an internal CA comes into play as well, where you set up an internal CA to be able to secure that communication from the proxy server to the backend. Okay, I think I've said enough about that. So now, now if we go back to the client here, and then if we go back and try to log in, hopefully I remember my password this time. Yeah. And if I do, just to clear things up here, I'm going to completely get out of this guy and then try to get back in. And then we're going to click enter here, and we're going to enter. And it's still serving that page. I'm going to get out. Sometimes it tends to cache things. I'm going to get into this guy. And you might need to clear your cache just in case it's caching things. And then click enter. And then just click enter. Not now. I don't really care about that being my default. Oh, I know what the issue is. I forgot to restart the proxy server. So what we want to do, I got too excited. So what we want to do is you want to go back. Don't get too excited like I did. So we want to go back and we want to click X here and we want to restart the proxy server because the proxy server is still holding on to that old config. So what we want to do is we want to go to system, SYSTEMCTL, restart ART engine X. All right, so now we'll do a system restart. So that's good to go. We're going to go back into the client. Click on that. It's a little bit slow. And then I'm going to load the thing again. And ideally, it should work now. Again, just keep in mind that sometimes it takes a while for things to kind of like kick in. You might have to restart. You might have to just clear your cache. But just once you restart the proxy server, it should ideally work. So if I click enter, so as you can see, it's already doing that. I'm going to refresh. And there you go. So now it takes us directly to our Proxmox server. We don't have to worry about pushing our certificate because if we go here and then we look at our certificate, we can see that our certificate is valid because, like I said earlier, the root certificate for Let's Encrypt is already trusted and it's already being pushed out to so many like systems. So you don't have to do things like push your certificates like we did the last time. So if we scroll down here, if we go to issuer, we can see that this was issued by Let's Encrypt. So again, this is a time saver. It prevents you from having to worry about your creating your own CA, making sure your CA is good, generating your certificate, having to manually push your certificate, having to do all of those things manually gets pushed out of the window when you have something that can do SSL termination for you. And you just use a public domain and then replicate your that zone internally and use that to be able to do SSL termination so you can secure all of your devices on your network. So if I go here, for example, I'm going to do a different browser and I'm going to click enter here and I'm going to click enter. And ideally, it should serve us. If I click enter, ideally, it should take us to the Proxmox server. Give it a couple of minutes here. It's kind of doing that. Again, you might need to clear your cache and all that stuff, but ideally, it should always come up and then gives you the Proxmox server. So give it a few, and there you go. We're in. The only other thing that I will add to it again is that, hey, just make sure that your communication between the proxy server and the backend server is also encrypted. So you kind of don't leave leeway for any sort of attack if someone was to be able to manage to make it into your environment, right? So that's just a bit of precaution depending on how secure you want things to be. But as you can see, it's going directly to the proxy server and we did not have to enter any port whatsoever. All we did is just enter that. And if we were to remove this, for example, let's say remove the HTTPS and then hit it on HTTP, it's going to force a redirect, which is going to redirect it back to our HTTPS because we already set that up. This is by far the most easiest way. And again, you can take this, you can grab it and you can go to anything as long as it's internal and they're able to see your DNS. That's important because you cannot access this externally, right? Because all of this is internal. So this is not going to be external because this is only the only reason why you're able to hit this, and I know I keep hitting on that point, is because your DNS know what to do when you hit this guy, right? So you can access any of your devices that is internal as long as they're looking at your DNS server. They should be able to hit this, and that connection should be secure because again, you're using a public public CA which generated a wildcard for you, which is already there. The root CA for that public CA is already trusted. So it's being pushed to all the devices, your phone, anything, everything secure, all of your services. All you have to do is just set up a new config for your service and all of your services are pretty much secure and good to go. Well, that is a wrap. Thank you guys so much for watching these videos. This kind of wraps up the SSL series for now. We have covered how to set up our own internal CA and use it. And we also talked about how to use a public CA when needed. There's still a lot more I want to dive into, but as we keep building our lab environment, we'll tackle those topics piece by piece. There's so much I'm working on, there's so much I'm learning, there's so much I'm building. And I want to share that journey with you guys, so do not forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification below. As always, guys, stay geeking, stay curious, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.